As she mentioned, I'm Dr. Ankhesenamun Ball. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been trained forensically and in neuropsychology, and I run a group practice that specializes in psychotherapy and psychodiagnostic assessment for youth and adults. And we service families with a myriad of diagnostic presentations. And we are located in the Bay Area. And so I have been moderating the third Thursdays for a while, and every third Thursday is an amazing opportunity to learn something new and to discuss some really hard-hitting topics that really impact our work. And tonight is another one. We have lots to talk about, and before we get started and before I introduce our two panelists, I'd like to just let everybody know, first and foremost, that we really appreciate you coming and that we really appreciate your comments in the chat during our events. So feel free to share your thoughts. We really look forward to hearing them. And just a few other announcements. You will also find these in the chat, just as Michele had mentioned. There's going to be a 30-day complimentary virtual yoga and Pilates from the pad, so definitely look for that information in the chat. Also, look for the companion guide to this event, and that's going to be in the chat. We will also be providing this event via recording, and it will be posted on the YouTube channel. Additionally, at the end of the program, there will be a complimentary meditation. Generally, it has been done via recording, but this time Emma will be guiding our meditation. So please feel free to drop in and say hello and welcome to Emma, and just to process some of the stresses that may come up as a result of having a discussion about finances in the realm of psychotherapy and psychology. And then last, but not least, I'd like to introduce our two panelists who are going to be joining us. And they are no strangers to the discussion of finances and the struggles around money for lots of different folks. Dr. Rosché Brown is the doctor of rethinking and has been a financial psychologist for a great while, talking with many people about their money struggles. She's also a licensed psychologist and a financial coach. She's also the author. She's also an author and a professor. So Dr. Rosché Brown has her hands in many different things. She is challenging her students and her audiences to remix their thinking, to think about what causes a mind shift or a new way of being on their journey, whether it's spiritual, psychological, or financial. She's looking at empowerment in all different ways. Her blended approach has incorporated spiritual teachings and life applications. Dr. Rosché has been very impactful in delivering her very thought-provoking discussions through workshops, and she does a lot of motivational talks, which I have been fortunate enough to attend. She infuses her psychological principles and her interactions and creates a rich and deep experience for all those in the learning environment. Recently, she launched her passion projects, Financial Mastery, which is, I think, absolutely wonderful, and Rethinking Money University. So to get some tips on how to rethink spending and rethink literally your wealth and finances, and thinking not only from past, but to future. So she's going to be joining us talking about some of these hard-hitting topics in relation to finances. And we also have joining us Dr. Nabil El-Ghoroury. And I got it? I think I got it correct. He is a PhD and is the executive director of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, or CAMP. Dr. El-Ghoroury, I'm going to say, or you can tell me if you prefer me to use your first name or if you prefer me to use Dr.
Dr. Nabil is fine. That's my brand on Twitter and Instagram, so Dr. Nabil works.
Okay, because that's what I had in mind, and I'm like, wait, that's not it. So Dr. Nabil has been recognized as an emerging association leader by the American Association of Executives, or ASAE. When he was invited into the Diversity Executive Leadership Program. This was in 2016 to 2018. Dr. Nabil has presented at numerous conferences in English and Spanish, definitely bilingual, on the issues such as self-care and leadership, which we are definitely needing to see more of currently. and ethical and legal issues in the use of social media, health disparities, topics in autism spectrum disorders, and mental health training workforce development, which we need a lot more of. He's spoken on 5 continents, and the next one is Australia. So that seems like that's going to be an exciting trip.
Well, not yet. That's the goal, is 6. That will make 6 is Australia.
Oh, okay. Yes. So let's get you all over this planet, right? Just a couple more things. Dr. Nabil is currently the chair of the ASAE Ethics Committee and treasurer of the American Arab, Middle Eastern, and the North African Psychological Association. Dr. Nabil completed his doctorate in clinical psychology from Binghamton University and practiced for 7 years at Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland as a licensed psychologist. Prior to coming to CAMT, he was the Associate Executive Director for the American Psychological Association, where he served as the Director of the Graduate Student Office. And as he mentioned, you can find Dr. Nabil on Twitter and Instagram. So thank you both so much for joining us this evening. As I mentioned, this topic is so important and hard-hitting, and it has been in the news lately. And I'm sure, people are really, really looking at their finances and their ability to save in this current climate with COVID. So I'm just going to kind of jump into some questions and let's talk about this. So, all right, everyone has their mute off because thank you, Dr. Rosché, I had my mute on.
So make sure there's no feedback.
Right. So let's start off first with, tell me what inspired you to get into financial coaching.
Should I go first? Sure.
We'll start this question with you.
Okay. So actually, I've been doing, therapy since 2006, but I realized that when it came down to most of my clients, that a lot of their mental health stress was also tied up in money stress. And so since people didn't know how to spend correctly, it wasn't about getting more money. It was more about their mindset around money. So about 6 years ago, I got really interested in learning a lot more information around advanced wealth techniques and starting to share that information with my clients. And so that really birthed this whole financial program around financial literacy, but particularly really focusing on the psychology around, how we save or spend our money. And so that's kind of how I got into the financial coaching arena.
I think that's absolutely fantastic because you're right. Just hearing recently about the, now I'm blanking on their name, GameStop incident, how many people lost lots of money. There were, I believe, a couple of suicides as a result of it. So psychology and finances are definitely intertwined. And because we don't often think about that, we sometimes think, they're fine, they just lost a little money. But I think that's actually a myth. And I'm curious, and Dr. Nabil, this is going to be for you. What is the biggest financial myth that therapists seem to face?
So I'll start with how I got into my interest in finances and loans. So at APA, I was the director of APAGS, which is the graduate student group. So the psychologists in the room might have heard that. But I used to talk to students all the time who had tons of debt, and it terrified them. And so we actually did a study on student loans, and it's published in Training and Education of Professional Psychology. And we did a quantitative and qualitative study to look at the myths, and particularly myths that faculties thought students had. There were myths that students went on trips to Europe and that's why they got loans, or they drove fancy cars. And I coded Kelly's Blue Book values of cars to document that there were 2 Mercedes-Benzes in our sample of 2000, but most people were driving hoopties, So we really directly addressed the myths. And so one of the myths, I think, is that people are using loans frivolously.
Mhm.
And that is absolutely not the case. Anyone who comes from a professional school, most professional schools are in big urban areas. So it's $30,000 of tuition plus rent,
Right.
and then if you are living in a couple cities, you might not need a car, but your placements tend to not be that close to public transit. So you need a car. That's another $500 a month, and so there are real expenses that come from graduate training. And I think that's one myth, that students are frivolous. And the reality is students are not frivolous with their money. They need it to survive. As there was a candidate for mayor in New York who said the rent is too damn high. The tuition is too damn high and the rent is too damn high.
Right.
So,
right.
So that's the myth, I think, is that students are frivolous, and that no way.
No, I think that's a really good point. And also to, address some of the things that Dr. Rosché brought in is that like this belief of how the money is being spent and the amount of money necessary in order to be successful to get through the program and to survive and to be able to focus. And you also brought up a great point about the schools being in urban areas. So ultimately, what do we know about being in the city? It's more costly, supply, demand. So the amount of debt and who takes out that debt in terms of our populations is also really important. And I don't know that that's always a conversation that comes up. So I'm really glad that you pointed that out. So just thinking about that, what would you say is a taboo topic when it comes to talking about income and money within our field? And what do you think that is? And Dr. Nabil, we'll start with you, and then Dr. Rosché will have you piggyback off.
So I think the taboo is talking about the debt. And we all know it's there. 90% of PsyD students need to take on debt to go to school. I don't remember the data on masters, but it's pretty high as well. And so I'd always dreamed of, and I never made this happen, but like a post-secret website where people listed their debt. And so we actually we did do that live at a conference when APA was in Hawaii. So, there may have been some people using their loans to get to that, to combine a vacation with a conference trip. But we had a board and people started putting in their numbers, and it was funny and sad when we started seeing people stick Post-its like off the edge because that's where their debt was.
Right.
And so I think we don't talk about it, but everyone has it, and it's the giant secret. So I think that's the secret, this taboo, I think.
And how about for you, Dr. Rosché? What are your thoughts?
I would agree with the same thing when it comes down to, what Dr. Nabil said, is that it's debt, and I think avoidance is one of those like key things that a lot of people do, is that we often attempt to avoid even thinking about it as an issue. And ultimately it comes up so much when, you're looking into home ownership, other things, like as you're trying to advance your life, you're like, I'm making all of this good money, or so to speak, right? More than you thought before, what you thought was going to be good until you got there. So you were in that place, of making some money, and then noticing that your student loans are impacting you from making other decisions in your life. I think that's like a huge thing. But I think there's a lot of areas around money within, just the world, but even like in mental health, when it comes down to potentially starting your private practice and trying to understand like what is your worth and what is your value, how do you charge? So those are some other areas around like finances that definitely come up, I believe, within our field.
Yes, I totally agree with both of you. I think too, it's something that I don't know if you have noticed, but a lot of clinicians don't post their fees or their rate on their sites or say anything about what their rate is. The patient can only discover it by contacting. And I've always been curious about that practice and whether or not it comes from us not wanting to share or feeling like we shouldn't and like it's a secret. So I think there's a lot of ways we don't talk about money.
Oh, agreed. Definitely. I mean, I think there's so many reasons why we probably do that. We don't want to scare people off because we have to teach them how to invest in themselves, right? So like if you get on the phone, then I could teach you about investing in yourself and why this is so important and how this is a great value to you. And so we don't want to share it until they get on the phone. I think some of that happens. And then even I know in the beginning stages when you're first starting in like a private practice, even talking about money and knowing like, is my hour of talking to you really worth this much? I think is an area that, we definitely have to work through.
That's what I was going to say is knowing your worth.
Yes.
But there is actually so I worked at APA and I now work at CAMFT. There actually is a legal reason in association or organizations, you actually can't talk about pricing because that could lead to questions about antitrust. Because all of us are competitors.
That makes sense, right?
And so we could set the price, but that doesn't mean you can't talk to people and ask, what is your fees? You can definitely do that privately, and then associations can collect data and survey data and bring it back the next year and tell people what data is. So CAMFT has data from our last survey was in 2017, and so we have survey data on 2017 rates. But knowing your worth, I remember I had a therapist that so APA had an amazing mental health benefit. They had a supplementary mental health insurance policy that covered everything but $10.
Wow.
Right? That's amazing. And so we could go to a self-pay person, and you would pay the entire bill, and then they would reimburse you minus 10. So you basically, it was free therapy. And I had a therapist who was fairly new, and he was charging, I'll say the price. He was charging $125 at the time. And so he had a conversation, and I knew the going rate in DC at the time was $175. And so he said he wanted to talk to me at the end of a session, and he said he needed to increase his rate. And I told him, it's about time. Your rate is low already. So I suspect he was new and he didn't want to talk about, he didn't feel he could charge that amount yet.
Right.
Well,
I think you both bring up really great and valid points, like knowing your value. And there is a dollar value, and then there is a value, a self-worth value in terms of just, your warm and fuzzies, let's call it that. But there is a real dollar amount that needs to be calculated and computed so you know what income you need to have so that you can cover your expenses. And then there is the value of therapy itself, which sometimes it seems like there's a pressure to provide the service pro bono or to provide the service at such a reduced rate because you care. And I think that in and of itself just washes away the idea of going to school and becoming a professional, right? So with that in mind, I want to talk a little bit about the assumption that higher education equals higher pay and how our industry prepares or doesn't prepare us for the reality of the professional future. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? And then I will ask a follow-up question to that. So I'll have Dr. Rosché, I'll have you start on this question, and then we'll jump to Dr. Nabil.
So I kind of alluded to this before, that I think that, of course, we kind of get in the field, we want to give service, but we assume that, once you get a degree, especially a higher degree, that you're going to make a lot of money. And I think a lot of money is all relative, and it depends on kind of your, childhood experiences, what, was your socioeconomic status growing up, what that feels like. I know, personally for me, when I first started making money, I got my doctorate degree when I was 25 years old. So I was making more money than anybody in my family. So it felt like a lot, definitely in the beginning. But then, over time, you start realizing what it really costs in order to live a beautiful life, an abundant life, and recognizing that maybe you're not making enough money for that, or you may not even have skills to be able to manage your money the correct way either. Right. And so I think those are some like areas, and I feel like it's not, and I say, what's a lot of money? I know it's relative. Once you start to get into private practice, you start understanding taxes. You're like, oh, wait, I need to raise my price. You know what I mean? Like, it's like all these things that you start understanding a little bit more, and you recognize that there's a lot more to it. So that's something to really take into consideration. And even the work that you like to do. I know when I first started, I was in more of the non-profit sector. So I loved, all the giving back and community mental health. I was just all about it, throw me in the trenches. And then I was like, ooh, that's a lot, and I'm getting burnt out. It's too much. I'm giving up. And so then you go into more of a corporate setting, you make more money, but it comes with its own, areas as well. And so everything has pros and cons of like when you're making good money. I'm really a big proponent on people having their own, at least aside something. So you can have unlimited abilities in that way.
Right. And I think that's a great point, having unlimited abilities. And Dr. Nabil, I'm wondering if you want to add to that as well.
When I started, I also was in, I was at a county hospital. So I was in, nonprofit, government world, really. And I was underpaid, but I was also underworked. Like, their expectations for me were so low that it was okay for the time I was there. I knew I was low paid, but they also didn't. I think my clinical load expectation full time was 16 clients a week, which I had colleagues who were half-time clinical in medical schools, and they were expected half-time to see 12. And so, I knew I was underpaid. And then part of the reason I made the jump to APA was because the pay was better. So I left therapy, but still in the field also because I can make a difference at the systemic level. One of the secrets, though, I'll tell you about working for the government was I was in the state retirement system. And so if you're at a county agency, those folks might be in, I think it's CalPERS here. In Ohio, it was OPERS. You don't pay Social Security in that. So your Social Security, your employer and your taxes go into the retirement fund, into the pension system. And at the time that I went to Cleveland, Cleveland doesn't sound so great. It actually was lovely and affordable. I bought a condo there for $100,000. I know. For Bay Area folks, that's what, a parking spot? It ain't an Airstream, right? And I had a 2.5 bath condo. So you had two options, the pension or self-directed, which is essentially you choosing options for retirement, right? Sort of 401k-ish, but within their system. Right. I chose that strategy because you got 20% of the employer contributions every year until 5 years. And, I was 31 at the time. I'm in Cleveland. How long am I going to be here? I don't know if I'm going to be here 5 years. To get the pension, you had to hit 5 years. Right. So I thought, okay, if I'm here 3 years, I get 60% of this employer contribution versus 0. So let's go for this self-directed strategy. When I left, I was able to take that money and roll it over into an IRA, and basically I got a jump start on my retirement because for 7 years I didn't put into Social Security, and all that money is in my control. So it was I didn't realize that was a clever play. So I had some, I actually had a bit of money saved up for retirement without me trying.
So what it sounds like is, like, for both of you, navigating the financial world has been something that you've really done on your own, and graduate schools didn't really help you or prepare you for what you were going to be experiencing. And I mean, myself included, like, I think my university offered one weekend class on how to set a fee, or how to, I'm pretty sure it was one, because I signed up for it and ended up not being able to make it. But one out of the 3.5 years I was there. and the reviews from it were like, no, that wasn't really helpful. So graduate programs are under, I think, training for this area of our field, where we have a large proponent of individuals going into private practice. But even understanding that, hey, you need to think about your 401k or your IRA and retirement. Like, when you're not working, are you still gonna, do you have enough to pay yourself that $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 salary per year, and for how long? So they're kind of doing us a disservice there. But I'm also wondering if you think that in graduate school, they prepared you for the reality of what is your real life salary going to be when you get out? Like, when you were in graduate school, did you assume that upon graduating that you were going to get that job that was going to wipe away your financial stress, create the financial stability that you were looking for? And did you even know what that meant? So, you know, what was the reality of this for either of you? And Dr. Nabil, we'll have you start first.
No, there was no discussion. And, you know, okay, so I'm going to reveal a little bit about my age. That, you know, when I was in grad school, the internet had barely started. So the access to data was not easy, you know.
I'm sure we all knew Netscape then, though.
Oh, I'm before Netscape. I mean, I took, if you guys remember psychological abstracts when it was books, that's how old I am. Yeah, I was the first DSM was 3 in my education. So I am, I'm older than I appear. But anyway,
you're refined.
I did not know about money at all. But the one thing that I had going for me was that I was in a funded PhD program. So I had tuition paid for. So at the time it was $11,300 over the year. So it was tiny, but I was going to grad school in Binghamton, New York. My rent for a 1-bedroom apartment was $350. So it was a struggle, but I could make it. And I only borrowed $38,000 over the course of my doctorate. So I did not get into a lot of debt. Mm-hmm. But remind me to tell people how I got out of that debt.
I will. That's coming. That is coming.
Okay, good.
So, Dr. Rosché, how about for you?
So that wasn't my story. Definitely. You know, so I did have to take out quite a bit of loans, only for academics. So I was pretty young, so I was able to still stay with my mom at the time. And I know that a lot of my friends had to take out even more because they had to also, get more loans for their just survival and regular expenses that I didn't have to do. So I was able to, I didn't have really any expenses during that time outside of the tuition. And so, but my tuition was like around about $30,000 a year. And that I had to pay. And so when I got done with, graduate school, I owed, I think, $150,000. So it was big dollars. And I remember when I first learned about compound interest, right? And what compound interest was. And it had to do with, and I'll talk about kind of the loan forgiveness that I had, but I ended up having a loan forgiveness. And then, but after the loan forgiveness and I went into repayment, it was $175,000. I was like, now, how did it go up You know what I mean? And it was like how I understood it. I was like, hold on, I had to have conversations with them, So I liked when Dr. Nabil said that he just did some accidental, clever plays. That's what kind of happened for my life. There were things that I stumbled upon that I began to be able to share with people. As you know, and when we get to the place of like, what did I do to kind of get my loans off? I definitely will share with those things. But it was, I got a lot of like, student loans, and had to do some really really serious plays in order to get those down.
Yes, I think many of us, to be honest, like, especially as Dr. Nabil pointed out, that when you did the APA posting of, who had debt and where they were on the spectrum, CIDs do carry a lot.
And our data is very clear on that. Our data is incredibly clear. The average debt is 120, but the range like the 75th percentile was 200,000.
Yeah.
And this was in 2015, $200,000 in debt.
Yes, and it's no joke. My experience is that is real.
Yes.
And I think part of it was the reality of, or what I went back and recognized is when I started grad school, it was 30 grand the first year. And then incrementally it got higher and higher. By the time, you graduated, it was a lot more. And then understanding the promissory note, understanding the compound interest, I think they had little, classes, but they don't go into great detail. And so at that time, and I think the huge disservice, and it does impact our Black and Brown communities far greater than our white communities, that there's a lot of students who have a lot of debt, and a large number of those with a debt are from Black and Brown communities. And then you're going to go out into an internship or a postdoc or, residency, and you're in communities that are usually hardest hit and struggling, and you're expected to be there for a very long time in order to either work up enough money, which they don't pay great, to then pay off the loans and then try and survive, or talk about ways of forgiving that loan. So before we jump to that, I'm just kind of curious, with you, like, it's been plus or minus 10 years. And, people like myself are still trying to survive with these loans. So I'm curious if you think that what it's like for some of those people, those families, clients, friends, and potential mates are often making the assumptions that therapists make a lot of money. And we also have to think about inflation and what a lot of money is today. So this puts therapists in a very awkward position. There is a huge emotional burden with trying to process the feelings that come up and think about my debt, or think about what I need to survive. So I'm just wondering, how do you cope under such, situations? How do you help people cope? Because a lot of people do struggle in silence, and I'm wondering, how do we help clinicians to really process that stress and really understand how to survive, and especially now in COVID? And Dr. Nabil, you want to start us off?
I was hoping I could go second. I will start though, because I'm a behaviorist at heart, so I opt for the challenge.
All right.
I'll tell you something so we're 3 psychologists here, and I don't know how many social workers, counselors, and MFTs we have in the audience, but I want to talk for a second about MFTs, and I think it applies to also social workers and counselors in California. So this is what I've learned so far. 2 years, a master's program is cheaper, generally half the price, right? So if you go to Pepperdine, that's $100,000 with living and tuition. If you go to a Cal State, that's the smart financial choice, you're probably closer to $60,000 in debt, right? You save $40,000 going to the public school. But so you get your master's degree, and then So just like in psychology, there was an internship crisis. There's a shortage of positions for people right with their masters looking to accrue their supervised experience.
Right.
And so there's so many people who have to do unpaid, or sometimes they have to pay. You have to pay $1,000 to get training at a certain place. And then you're supposed to, I don't even know how you live if you are unpaid. And then the student loan bills, you have 6 months. And then on month 7, that bill is due. So, I mean, like psychology, the internship crisis was tough, but there were generally positions. California was unique because you guys had some unpaid spots, but, you know, I mean, there's levels of privilege all over the place, you know, and I'm really fortunate that I was in a most privileged status, that I didn't have the debt. I think a big part of it, to me, honestly, is number one is, and I'm sure Dr. Rosché will say this, facing your fears, facing the debt, because I think about there's one student I worked with. He's now a psychologist, and he would tell me about the panic attacks he'd have when he'd get the paperwork. And, you know, and a natural strategy is just tuck that envelope in a drawer and don't even open it when it comes from Department of Education. I think the first step is acknowledge the fear, right? Like you can't you can't solve the problem until you at least face it. Right. And so I think that's one important thing, is really like look at the amount you owe currently, and look at how much, and figure out how much you think you're going to owe when you finish. But look at the interest as it's growing, because you know that that $20,000 or $30,000 you borrow for tuition that first semester, that tuition gets interest the moment you take it, and it starts growing, that's another privilege I had. I had most of my loans were subsidized. So until I graduated, the interest rate didn't hit. And those got canceled in 2012, you know, so, but open the envelope, look at the promissory note, look at how much you owe is one first step.
Awesome. And Dr. Rosché, how about your thoughts?
Yes, I agree. You know, just have to increase awareness. So stop avoiding. It's time, right? You know, use some of those skills that you teach all of your clients, right? You know, take a couple of deep breaths, you know what I mean? Get ready to see it. Because I think in the place of being able to face your fears, then you can also get some coaching around it. You start to come on things like Thursdays, right? You pray that somebody would create something like this. So you'll learn some more information that you begin to start, you know, investing in, like, you know, financial coaching, or someone to teach you about how to manage all of these things, right? Your own personal expenses plus your debt. You need to understand like how to do this. And so you need somebody to help you along the way. And I think that is important for us that we understand accountability is so needed in our emotional health. We need some accountability when it comes down to our financial health as well. So I think that's really where everything really gets started is there. You know, definitely face your fears, look at it, open it up, see what it is. If I knew what I knew now and I was in school, just kind of what Dr. Nabil said about the idea about interest, that maybe I would have even potentially started to pay some of that interest at that time. But I had no understanding of that. But, you know, if people are like actually in school, maybe it's possible that you might be starting to kind of pay some of that down even now, and getting yourself in good positions in that way. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. In terms of like really tackling the issue, like you can't do anything if you're not informed, right? It doesn't matter what the issue is. It could be financial, it could be racial, it could be anything. If you're not informed, you won't have the skills to tackle it. And I think while there are many things that the loan companies can do, that the schools can do, there's also a lot that we can do. And so you kind of answered the next question that I had, is like kind of thinking about our current situation looking forward. How do we get ourselves through? How do we help others? Just looking at it. And how do we help our future generations? Are there other things that you would have done to help?
That I can answer. The reason we did that study was to try to educate future therapists, like to be informed, because so we wanted to document, think about the debt before you apply to grad school. Because if you apply to grad school and you apply to, I'm going to assume a psychologist pathway, you apply to 10 PhD programs that generally have some form of funding and 2 PsyD programs. If you do that before you think about the money, and the only 2 that you get into are the PsyD programs with no funding, it's hard to turn away from, I got into grad school, And so thinking about the money before you apply and using that in your process. So we developed at APA, we developed materials for undergrads and post-bac to look and evaluate programs and evaluate debt. And you can't ask, so the accreditation system at APA, they never asked about debt, but they asked about funding, because you can't verify debt without major confidentiality breaches.
Right.
But you can ask, do you fund, and verify that when you have site visits. So they ask about funding, they ask about tuition rates, which were verified, and basically any program that offered tuition reimbursement, they said it like in their materials. 50%, 100% of students get tuition reimbursement the first year. And so one thing I've thought about is trying to reach to undergrads and post-bac folks, and in the master's areas, the second career folks. What are your options, and how can you accomplish your goals in a less expensive way?
Dr. Rosché, is there anything you'd like to add?
I keep thinking about the importance of just still your personal finances, even outside of the debt. Educating yourself, because what tends to happen, as you were just mentioning, like kind of like Black and brown folks and stuff like that, what happens is that you also don't have good money management skills anyway. So if we just like took the debt, put it to the side, that you may be incurring even more debt or levels of debt, just based on like poor money management. Because just making more money does not mean that that you're going to be able to do better with that more money. Right. More money just makes you more of who you are. If you're like not really a good, saver, you won't be a good saver just because you have more money. Right. If you like to spend frivolously, you're going to just spend more frivolously. Right. If you have vices of any type of sort, you're just going to do more of the vices when you have the more money. And so I think that is like a really like important area. Because one thing that I was able to do to kind of help me regarding my student loans was actually home ownership. And that was a huge thing. And so that means keeping your personal credit in order, keeping yourself with the level of learning how to save is going to be important, making sure your debt outside of that student loan debt is in good order. Something I would share about just student loans and just credit. The interesting thing is a lot of times, because we avoid, you can find yourself in bad credit. And student loan doesn't even have to be a bad place, but it really becomes bad for people when they don't pay attention, they don't do their deferment paperwork, or they don't do their income-based repayment paperwork, and they'd be like, I'll just leave it. And they just kind of let the bills come in and ignore it. And then you end up having all these late payment histories. And so your student loan late payment history will it will dip. Your credit score, and you could be doing well in every other area, but
Yes.
because you avoided this area, it will dip it. So I think that's something to know, and you don't think, because you're like, oh, student loan debt is not that bad of debt. Oh, but it can be, if you're not, handling it appropriately. It's not even about paying it, but at least putting the right paperwork and communicating correctly with the loan agencies about what's going on.
I think another great point to think about, and this is something that our current, I think, viewership and individuals who are currently struggling with this can do. If you have different loans, which many people had to take out multiple loans, look at the interest rates for your loans.
Yes.
Not all of the interest rates are the same. And what I unfortunately learned twice over, I'm one of those people, the type of loans that I had did not qualify for the type of loan forgiveness. So we're going to talk about, understanding our loan forgiveness options. So you don't know, you can't, adequately prepare yourself for your future. So definitely take a look at your loans, take a look at your interest rate. And if you can, make sure that they're applying higher amounts to the higher interest loans so that you're paying those down faster and not the other way around. Because, if you got a low interest rate on a loan, that one you can pay off over time. But if you have a high interest rate, like 9, 10, anything I would say above 6 is high, that's gonna make your loans larger. So knowing that, thinking about that, next step is loan forgiveness. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on public servant loan forgiveness and other forgiveness programs? And Dr. Rosché, do you want to start on your loan forgiveness options?
Yes. So one of the loan, and this still is here, but I had the mental health loan assumption program. You guys can Google that. That was, it was, I think, based on 1 year service. I got $10,000, $20,000 for that. And so that was something that really did help me in the beginning. Of course, we have the public service loan forgiving, but I feel like the only issue with that, and what was an issue for me and could be for other people, is it's limiting. Because it forces you to stay at a certain type of job that maybe you want to move from. I was even talking to a good friend of mine at one point, and I was giving her an option to have a great job. I was like, hey, I have, the ability for you to get into this job. I have the connections and everything. And she said to me, nah, I'll just stay here because I only have another 2 years, before they will,
forgive the loan.
And, to me, that is just definitely limiting you in your abilities, right? Because she would have been making, significantly, another $30,000, $40,000 difference from what she was making now, but she was worried about her student loans being forgiven at one point. And so I do feel like there is some limitations with that. But, because it's 10 years, because of the time that is needed to dedicate to that. But if you look at other ones, like the mental health loan assumption program, is only a year, right? So you can I don't have to do a year, maybe another year,
right.
To chip down at some of your loans in that type of way. I think that's a important way. I did say before, what I was able to use, and this was kind of I stumbled upon this. Was really my home ownership, so when I was able to purchase a home, I was able to actually redirect the debt. So it wasn't that it was gone, but what I learned over time is learning about taxes is that once you start making a certain amount of money, usually around $70,000, which seems like a lot until you get there, is that you no longer are able to take the interest. So all this student loan interest is no longer a write-off for you. And so that was huge to me. I was like, what? And I was paying somewhere between $600 and $700 of interest per month.
Right.
Per month, and so I think that it was just really important that I was able to change that, because mortgage interest is something that I was able to take, and I was able to take as a write-off. And when you understand your interest rate, I would think my interest rate for my student loans were around 4.5. But my home loan was only 3.5. right? So even that, like changing the level of the debt really like helped a lot. And if I, sell my house, when I sell my home, then I've also canceled all my debt. You know what I mean?
Right.
In that way too. So that was something that I was able to do. That was just kind of a trick that I stumbled upon. And I would definitely tell for everybody is to call your student loan companies and talk to them. Understand what the options are, because they'll stay on the phone with you forever. And I've done it. And they will explain things like they're like, wishing that somebody called or something. So definitely you.
Oh.
Yes. No, I think they're great points. Like, again, it's all about being informed and understanding how to move debt, and also understanding your debt to income ratio. And, definitely talk with the banker about that. But Dr. Nabil, what are your thoughts on loan forgiveness?
So I'm going to talk about a federal version of what Dr. Rosché got, which is the National Health Service Corps loan repayment. That's program. So loan repayment program, not loan forgiveness. And then I'll talk about public service loan forgiveness after. So the National Health Service Corps is funded by HRSA, from Human Health and Human Services, HHS. HRSA, Health Resources Services Administration. And so they are the healthcare part of the federal government. And they are clearly trying to incentivize people to work in certain communities.
Yes.
Okay. And so and they're funding primary care, dental care, and behavioral health. Okay. So my hospital in inner city Cleveland, Ohio, was considered a health professional shortage area. We had a high enough score and not enough providers in the community. And so 4 of us were able to get loan repayment. And I'll tell you my story. I was the last one because I bought my condo before I applied. And that was actually too complicated to do while I was doing both. So I applied. And they said, keep paying your loans. Keep paying your loans. Don't stop paying. Okay. So I applied and I had to go back and forth with they wanted the original promissory notes. I had to call a bank and they had to go, into a box in Oklahoma and find it and send it to me. Okay. So I got the promissory notes I needed. I got accepted. So they said, congratulations, you're in. It was 2-year commitment and up to $50,000 in loan repayment. And so I only owed at that point $36,000. I had paid off $2,000 over the last 3 years at this point. So, but they said, keep paying. You'll get the money wired to your account sometime. We don't know when. And so I kept paying, and then it was November. So this was in July I got the notice. In November, I went to the ATM and pulled out $40, and my cash was like $39,000. What? Thank God this was before Instagram or Snapchat, because I would have been. I would have done that stuff. Thank God that didn't happen back then. But I enjoyed that money for a weekend. And then on Monday, I sent checks to Sally Mae and the other bank that I owed money to, and gone. And so that was wonderful. Then I worked for 2 years at my hospital, and I would have stayed a little bit longer until the APA job came up. And then I was volunteering a lot at APA, so it made sense. And by that point, I had accomplished all my professional goals that I had set out when I started. And so I hit everything. I completed my contract. I'm kind of getting bored. And, it was time for the next chapter of my life. So National Service Corps, if you work, so in California, so I'm assuming most of our listeners are from California, your best bets are going to be in the rural areas. So not in the Bay Area, not in LA County, but we're talking more Kern County, far Inland Empire, San Bernardino County. or the very inner city of your urban communities, the real, like, so you get a score, you get your site scored by HRSA. That you provide a bunch of information, and they have their own demographics of the catchment area near your site, and then based on that, they develop a health professional shortage area, HPSA score. And the higher your score, the more likely you are to get funded. When I applied, they actually did not have enough applicants. So there were people, I mean, this was the golden days. So there was a private practice person in La Jolla who qualified. You know, they would never qualify now. Now it is definitely competitive, and it's based on the score, and but I still know people who are getting it. I have a friend in rural upstate New York, and he is getting it in private practice, but he has to see Medicare or no fee patients to get this. And it's a 2-year contract, $50,000. You can keep renewing it. It might go down in price in years 3, 4, 5, and 6, but you can keep renewing it if you still qualify until your loans are gone. So it's different from the OSHPED, the California program, which is I think it's a 2-year or 3-year. Okay, so public service loan forgiveness. So I lived in DC. I know the Beltway. So I have always said, don't trust this. Like, I will believe it when I see it. And I was saying this when we were under Obama's administration, because it took years for them to develop the paperwork to document. And I don't think they came to an agreement on the payment schedules until halfway through. So if you weren't on the right payment schedule, your payments don't count.
Right.
But so we knew the date would be 2017 when the first people would be eligible. So for payments from 2007 to 17, you need to do 120 payments working at a qualifying agency, which is government or nonprofit, 501c3. And APA was 501c3. So my colleague and co-author on the debt paper, Eddie Amin, he was counting on this loan forgiveness. I knew, I didn't believe it until I saw it happen. And then before I left APA, they were talking that they undervalued how much it would cost. And so this was bad, that they expected it to cost, I'm going to make a number up, 10 billion over 10 years. And the actual price when they started getting closer and calculating was 18 billion over 10 years or whatever. It was it was an underestimate by far. And that was already problematic under a good administration. When 45 was elected, because I don't say his name, when 45 was elected and DeVos appointed Secretary of Education, 99% of applicants have been rejected for public service loan forgiveness. So a lot of people have been banking on this. And now I'm hopeful that with a Biden administration, that there will be a revisit of this, and that we will start to see some people actually qualify. And so I want to see that happen. And then I want to, my dream would be to talk to people who got it and figure out what did they do, right? But I still say I would not count on it, unfortunately. I think if you love what you're doing in the nonprofit world, stay at it. If you love it, stay there. And especially if they're compensating you well, and and even better, if you're getting that national service score or OSHPED mental health, the grant that Dr. Rosché was talking about, if you're getting those and nipping away and you like your job and you're doing okay, that's great. I'm not sure I would stay at a crappy job I'm with Dr. Rosché. I might have taken that $40,000 better paying job. But I'm hoping that there will be some people who do qualify, that we start to learn what are the secrets, like what payments you need, how you document, that kind of stuff. But once again, it's a very expensive bill. And the 2012, so in the 2012, when grad students direct subsidized loans happened, this was, if you remember, this was right after ACA was passed. And so the Republicans regained Congress and they blocked everything, right? Nothing got through. Nothing got through. Democrats and Republicans united in eliminating direct subsidized grad student loans to fund undergrad Pell Grants. No one is a grad student ally in DC. They all think you're going to make that money, and so you don't need that. You don't need that less expensive thing. And so it came so fast. And I was not as aware. If this happened now, I would have been much more aware of this. I was not as sophisticated in my understanding of government relations at the time. But it happened so fast, and there were no allies fighting for this. And so by the time we found out about it, the deal was signed, and that Budget Act and the direct subsidized loans disappeared, and that cost grad students what? So an average PsyD program with 4 years of loans, like if you got $10,000 subsidized, that actually cost you $20,000. Because each loan starts accruing interest, and that was a meaningful loss. But I'm hopeful that we're going to get some PSLF in the next couple years. And I'm curious what people listening are thinking. Am I bursting your bubble? And I'm sorry.
I think it's a great and it's a valid point. Like, I don't think there is enough information, and I am glad that you brought up the point that when we do hear from our administration about what is coming down the pike, everything has been signed, the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, so there's not really that opportunity to advocate for change because we're coming at it too late. And I'm thinking of APA in particular, because there was APAPO, or there is APAPO, and I had been paying into that for a very, very long time, and that was one of the things that they discussed. This is a lobbyist group. We work with our government to put mental health and mental health practitioner needs on the front lines. And one of my questions for the two of you is, do you think that our federal government is appropriately aware of the cost of mental health, behavioral health needs in our country?
Appropriately aware.
Just
in my mind, I mean, the only reason why I said that is because I feel like they are aware. I just don't feel like I think there are other things that are more a priority in their minds to manage. I mean, I just think about when I think they were just talking to President Biden about it, and him talking about his I think his children and the amount that they had, But I think that they're when it comes down to politics, there's all these other like nuances that we don't know that happens, right. That makes things not work the way that we think that they should. Because I was really banking on the 50,000. I was like, come on, let's go. I'm still gonna pray for it.
That still might happen. You never know. Or 25,000.
Yes.
Well, we know for a fact it's 10,000. I mean, we know, like today, Biden came out and said, nix on the 50 grand, but 10 grand is still on the table. And the reason I even
to most PsyD programs,
maybe like a dime.
Yes.
Not a whole quarter, maybe like a little dime. But, the reason I ask is because you think of like our viewership, you think of our graduate students, you think of all of the people who've gone into this field, and we're the tool, we are giving back. And I think personally for my situation where I'm running a group practice, I have clinicians on my payroll, they're seeing clients, and I'm looking at my expenses, I'm looking at the cost of seeing the client, I'm looking at the crisis and the insurance reimbursement rates. And there is a point at which the reality is we know we need behavioral health services. We know that. But where's the funding for supporting the need? And are we doing a disservice to our mental health profession by not providing for that need? What are your thoughts?
That's a tough question, because I think that the federal government is barely in recognition that mental health is an issue. But I think there are some things that have happened that have made it much more relevant. Okay, so Iraq and Afghanistan wars have made PTSD into the lexicon. Everyone knows what PTSD is, and it's very easy to talk about mental health of veterans. And so that is something that I think is helping the challenge on the debate on the conversation on mental health. And then COVID actually is changing things, because like I remember I was talking to my federal lobbyist, and I called him. So I shut down our office on March 13th. We went remote March 13th. And I called him like March 25th or so 2 weeks later, and I was standing in my backyard saying, you need to get mental health into a COVID or post-COVID bill, because there's going to be a mental health crisis. I can see it coming, and it's going to be like there's going to be a need, tremendous need, and I was right. I called that, and I saw it coming. And so that may change the debate, the lexicon, and like really encourage reduce the stigma about it, because everyone's talking about it now. And then that's not even talking about the opportunities. Like, we are all going to need social skills training when we start going back into socializing, because none of us are going to know what to do. Handshake, greet, hug, elbow, bow, high five. We're going to be all like, it's going to be, it's going to be, and then everyone's going to have, well, not everyone. Some people may have panic attacks after the first outing. I can see all kinds of things going on. Yeah. And there's not enough of us to take care of everyone.
So I'm going to throw this question at you both. Would you say, what would your thoughts be on loan forgiveness versus more finances or financial money, or more money put into behavioral health for the clinicians that are on the front line? Would you have a preference? Because 100% of our viewership believes that loan forgiveness is necessary. So what do you think would be a good, like if we had, government officials watching, what would you think that's a good strategy, to either forgive the loans of those on the front line or put more money into forgiveness options?
That is such a difficult question, because the answer would be both, right? Because it really, to me, it's like an individual concern, and there's like kind of the collective concern, right? And I feel like loan forgiveness helps us on an individual way, right? Because it'll then take pressures from us to be the best, providers that we can be. And so I think that's an important area. But when you think about putting more money into behavior, it's going to be needed. It's just, they're going to have to put more money when it comes down to behavioral health. Everybody is in need of it. I remember that same experience for me, during COVID. I remember that first 3 weeks of shelter in place. Nobody was calling or anything. I also work at Kaiser, and everybody's like, okay, we're just going to chill for this 3 weeks. When that extended, when it extended, oh my goodness, the levels. And to even look to this day, if you were to call for services, we're looking at accesses like 7 or 8 weeks. You know what I mean? So you already took too long to call, and then you have to wait another 7 or 8 weeks. So it's just a necessity that they're going to see that it's going to be, a lot more that's going to come in mental health. There's people who never even thought that mental health was even an issue in their lives. that now knows that it is, and so I think that it's just kind of a both. I can't decide when it comes to that, but I think what would probably happen more than anything is more money in behavioral health more than it would be in us getting our loan forgiveness. I just think that's what's going to happen, but I prefer both.
And Dr. Nabil, how about for you?
Ooh, that is a tough question. I kind of agree both, but I'm going to make a choice because we're going to have to do this, and so I'm going to talk it out first. I'm not quite. I don't know where I'm going yet. I'm torn about loan forgiveness because I would rather see the system changed on tuition and education. One of the factors, like tuition, is not growing at inflation rates. It's growing at 3-10 times inflation rates.
Yeah.
Okay. When I was applying to grad school, tuition at professional schools, so when I applied in 92 for going to graduate school in September of 93, I believe CSPP back then, their tuition was $12,000 a year. I know, right? Criminal, right? And they keep in mind, LA rent and San Francisco rent, that was right after the earthquake. So rent was cheap in San Francisco, right? And so tuitions, so loan forgiveness is not addressing the problem. The problem is the cost of higher education are ridiculous. Higher education has become higher business. Right. And so and that's not just mental health. That is the whole educational system, so that's a battle that I don't know that this group or even all therapists can defeat. At the same time, I see tremendous the burdens on agencies to treat such difficult populations that have so many problems and so few solutions. There's a lot of agencies. So I've been in talk to agencies that don't pay their associates, the master's students accruing hours. And I think part of the issue is the requirements for Medicaid reimbursement are so onerous that it actually isn't worth it. They'd have to hire so many staff to do all the QA data collection and output and record monitoring and treatment planning that it actually doesn't make financial sense. That troubles me that our healthcare system relies on unpaid labor.
100%.
So based on that, I'm talking it out. Based on that, I'm going to say put money into behavioral health and get more people, more salaried people, and help them pay their loans. But I'll tell you this other piece, one other piece. So I at APA, I've gotten to go a lot of places. I spoke in Romania to the European Psychology Student Federation of Psychology Student Associations, EFSA. And I talked about getting into grad school in the US. In Europe, psychologist is a master's degree, and there aren't the other master's programs as much. Marriage and family therapy is not as much really represented there. And I talked to someone from Switzerland. She paid $200 a semester to get her master's degree. Because in those countries, you are supported through your education, and so our values here are so I'm sounding a little Bernie right now. I'm sounding a little Bernie. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to sit here in my jacket because it's about 50 degrees in San Diego. But, I would like to see a system where we let people go to school and not have to take on this debt to get the degree. I'd like to start there.
And Dr. Roche, I see you nodding your head. You might want to unmute yourself and if you want to throw in your 2 cents.
I was having all kind. I was like, woo, $200. Oh my God, our values, like, just a tear almost came to my eye. Like, what would life be like? You know what I mean? If you only paid $200 to get your degrees. Oh my goodness, the like level, like that just seems so amazing. So my mind just really thought about what would a world like that look like? How much more healthier we would be, just even mentally, if we didn't have these kind of financial burdens on us, like what happens now. So yeah, that's just where I was, and I was just feeling, and I felt Bernie in the spirit, like.
Well, I think that we're bringing up so many hard-hitting topics, because the reality is it's not just about the loan forgiveness, and it's not just about figuring it out. I mean, we've taken this to a point where it's become so secretive, and I'm just kind of curious with thinking about like relationships and marriage and communication, like how many people actually like talk to their partners about their student loan debt, and what impact does it have on their relational lives? And I'm curious about your thoughts. Our pollers say 56% say yes to being afraid to tell your partner about student debt. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, how this debt might impact relationships. And Dr. Rosché, I'm going to start with you.
Oh yeah, I would say, so it does, right? Just the idea that you have to like come together, and like your debt ends up coming together. And so that can be really scary to have to share with somebody, particularly if your partner is more financially responsible. That doesn't always happen, right? So I think that if the partner isn't as financially responsible, the fear is not as much there. But it's a huge thing, and it's something that, finances are a big deal when it comes down to couples anyway. And managing, how are you going to operate with money, and how are we going to spend, and how do we want to, navigate joining our finances together? So that's a big issue anyway. And just the idea that, somebody else's decisions prior to knowing you can impact you for what is considered the rest of our lives, right? If we think of marriage correctly, right? So I think that, it's a big deal in that. So, yeah.
Yeah. And for you, Dr. Nabil, what are your thoughts?
Well, okay, so I am in this state of privilege that by the time, I've been with my partner now almost 11 years. I had no student loans, but I'll tell a story. I think the finances and couples is a relevant one. So my partner, so I'm gay, I have a male partner, but you might have seen him walk in from work. He passed by a couple minutes ago. So he was married to his prior partner, but this was back before gay marriage was legal. And so he got gay married, but he could, in Massachusetts, but he was a resident of Maryland, he couldn't get gay divorced in Massachusetts, because you had to be a resident 1 year in Massachusetts, 1 year in Massachusetts. And then in Maryland was not recognizing or giving privileges to marriage, to gay marriage. So they weren't breaking them. They weren't divorcing them. And so DC, 6 months residency to move into DC. And so we went to an attorney to talk about the divorce. And I had never gone to an attorney before. And you know how in our questions, we ask intrusive questions in our assessment? Like very intrusive questions that people are like, I can't believe you're asking me that.
Yes.
Right? The questions attorneys ask in a divorce are, and we were also asking to make a will. What are your assets? How much money do you make? What are your assets? What are your debts? And I was clutching my pearls, like, oh my Lord. And so it was very shocking to me. And that was when I learned that I was the one with financial resources, and my partner didn't have those financial resources. Like at that point I had $100K in my 401k, and he didn't have $1,000. And so our net worth was very split. And so that was pretty shocking at that Luckily, we've been able to talk about that since, but that's a reality of every couple. Is that it's hard to talk about, and I've seen couples break up over finances. Like you didn't tell me you were in so much debt.
Yes, I can definitely speak to that. My partner and I've been in a relationship. I guess we've been married for 8 years. I should really know this. I don't even know how old I am. I'm somewhere close to 40, but I have a lot of student debt. And so prior to getting married, prior to engagement, I talked about my debt openly. It was like, this is what I'm trying to do to, get rid of it. And I wanted it so bad to be mine. And I think this is really important for couples. I think this is really important for individuals. Like when you get married, it's not just yours anymore. It becomes ours. And so I think that, especially when it came to buying a house and me wanting to have my name on the deed and the loan, like you have to understand, like Dr. Rosché, you pointed out, that debt is there and it can hinder you in many different ways. And even if you're not buying a house, you're just talking about spending. Like you have to be able to talk about your finances and spending and what you have and what you want together. So I think it's really important to have this talk.
Yeah. And understand that marriage is a business. So you need like some actual business understanding to really manage it the best way. Even when you're thinking about that idea of buying a house, like maybe one person needs to have the loan in their name and then the deed is in both. Or, these are things that you kind of need to know to do things the best,
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic that we're having this conversation. And it's so timely that we're having, so many, discussions about this in our news, in our, like, it's just kind of everywhere. You have protesters that are saying, like, let's eradicate debt. So I'm just thinking about, for those who are in graduate school, what are a couple of things that, you've mentioned a few. Learn your loan, understand like the math that's going into it. But what other things might you recommend that they begin doing to prepare themselves while they're in school? And Dr. Rosché, I'm going to have you start.
So, so we kind of talked about, basic financial education, understanding your student loans before, getting your student loans. I want to speak to entrepreneurship so much because I think it's something that, if we understood it early, we would do so much better in understanding, even as we're going out to get W-2 jobs and different things like that, that we don't want to have a cap on the amount of money that we can make. And so I think it's something for us to learn at that time. I think also just the idea of even learning around investing, whether it's stock market investing, but even getting into that place that you understand, when you are choosing a job, get in a 401k, are they matching, get in an IRA, understanding what those even mean, because a lot of us have no reason to know that, and especially if nobody in our families have ever spoken about that, we don't understand those concepts. But, when it comes down to building wealth, time is the most important aspect. Right. So the earlier you start, the...
Oops, did she freeze?
It looks like we froze for a second, but I'm assuming you froze for a second.
Oh, sorry.
No, you were saying the earlier you start, and then I'm assuming the better.
Yeah, the earlier you start, the better, right? The formula for wealth is time plus money equals wealth, right? And so you have a lot of time, you can have little money to make it to the wealth. But if you don't have as much time, you need a lot more money to get there. And then things can be a lot more stressful. So the earlier you can start in investing even small amounts, you'll be surprised where you can be in 20 years, and understanding that you can be more prepared for retirement and not having to work, but at least having options of what you want to do, once you get, older as well.
Yes, great point. And Dr. Nabil?
So I am cheating. I'm going to post a link to something that I worked on at APA. So I posted it just right now in the chat. So, the tips that I would say for those starting out: know what you owe, face your debts. Really try to not take on a penny that you don't need. So create a budget, reduce your expenses. I mean, have a roommate. You don't need cable TV. Share Netflix and Hulu with someone, so you pay one and they pay the other, right? So really pare down as much as you can, and then try to pay your interest rate while you can, if you can, and then really avoid the federal loans. If I were in grad school right now, if 2020 stuff was here when I was in grad school, I would have been hustling on the side somehow. I would have asked people for work. I would have been Uber Eats driving or Uber driving. And then the wish I knew was I wish I had known about Roth IRAs. Because when I started grad school, I worked for the summer before and I had $3,000 saved up. And that money went probably to pizza. It went to pizza. I don't even know where it went. I can't even tell you where it went. But had I invested 2,000 of that, I would never have missed it. And that 2,000 would have been invested for 30 years by this point, like 28 years. It would be worth a meaningful amount. And if I'd gotten to the habit of saving some money, like even just $50 a month, just the habit of doing that, paying yourself first. So when I didn't learn about IRAs until really 10 years ago. So at that first job, I did some investing through work that was automatically deducted. So that's good, but it also had high fees and I didn't understand those yet. And so it's like 10 years ago, I started caring about this and started researching and talking to people. And I learned, Vanguard is really good. And I learned there are low fees investments, and I moved all my money there. But I wish I had known about investing and savings. I remember being at an amusement park with some of my friends, and a friend was in law school and another one's an attorney, and they were talking about retirement. I think they were talking about Roth IRAs and 401ks. And I just ignored them because I'm like, I'm on a roller coaster. I don't care. And I should have been listening in. What are you saying? Huh? What should I do? I'm broke. How do I should have done that.
Right.
But we all learn, and just pick up pick up where you are, dust yourself off, and start walking.
Yes. I 100% agree. And Dr. Rosché, is there anything that you want to add?
No, I concur. All of those things.
You're like, preach.
Yes.
I think, for our graduate students who are currently in school and trying to figure it out, it is important to make those budgets, to put those numbers together, and to figure out what is your minimum viable necessity to survive. And I think for, what I'm hearing too, for our current our practicing individuals who are currently in this situation, think about these future expenses, think about these future needs, such as your retirement, and how are you or are you saving towards that? And if not, is that factored into the rate that you charge? Is that factored into the salary that you're requesting from any organization that you might be working for? Yes, they have benefits. That is great. If you have a 401k, that is great too. But are you contributing enough? So it sounds like, positioning yourself for the long term and understanding not only your current finances, but what your future finances will be too. Is that accurate reflection of some of the thoughts and ideas that the two of you have been sharing?
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
One other thing that I would want to share with everyone, I think probably many people who have loans are aware of this, that if you have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have the federal loans or Department of Education loans that are in, I guess, government forbearance, or the government has said you don't have to pay these until September, there's no interest accruing on those either. So if you are able to pay anything towards that, that will be knocking off some of the interest. Is that true? Yeah, those are the, I believe,
administrative forbearance or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the direct, okay.
Yeah, because there are two types. There's the Department of Education, and then there is the
like
other
private
ones.
loans or something. Yeah, like
there's private, and then there's federal loans. So there are different types. So this is why it's really important to know what your loans are. And if it is under the Department of Education, which I recently discovered, they're in forbearance. I want to say forbearance. I'm not 100% sure what the terminology is, but it's a carryover from what happened during the Trump administration, where they were temporarily stayed, and then the Biden administration extended it out.
Oh, that's part of the COVID bill.
COVID bill.
Part of the COVID bill. Okay, that's part of the okay. You know, here's a secret for public service loan forgiveness. I thought of something that is a great tip. Okay, the natural instinct is to not pay your loans in the first 6 months, or when you're at those first crappy jobs. You know, like you don't really think about it too much. If you happen to be full-time employed, because that's the key, you have to be full-time employed. Right. If you are full-time employed and you are on a postdoc, you're making $25,000 a year. Those months count equally as the last month when you're a supervisor making $90,000. So there is a strategy to figuring out the payment package you want to be on, and then if you're really making $25,000 a year, your loan payments will be less than the interest on some of those payment plans. And so $56 a month counts as 1 month. So there is a strategy in paying off when you are the poorest, the most broke, because some of those, rather than defer those 6 months or a year.
Yeah.
So
it's just a thought that I had. I was thinking about while we were talking.
So can I read? Go ahead. Oh, sorry, Rosché. Go ahead.
No, I would agree with that. And I was going to say, to even add to it, even if you end up having additional income, like from a 1099, this is what did happen in the time when I was in income-based repayment options. Even though I was making more money, let's say than that 25,000, as we're using this example, you can, even when you're reporting, if you report right before taxes for your income-based repayment, you can let them know, like, oh, that other money is not consistent enough. So you can you can choose to only tell them the full-time job and not the extra money that you may be getting from Uber eating or even your private practice or anything like that. You don't have to report all of that as long as you report it prior to, like, you've already done your taxes for that year. So they'll take your word for that.
So let's just recap, because we had some echo. And so for individuals who are watching us, it looks like Dr. Nabil was saying, if you are making, let's say, $25,000 a year, and your student loan payments are, let's say you're even doing estimated income repayment option, and your student loan payment is like $56, but the interest payment on that loan is still like $600, you can continuously make those minimum payments, because that still counts under the public service loan forgiveness. And so if you're paying $56 and maybe even goes up to $80 a month after month, those payments still count. And when you hit that threshold for the forgiveness, the remainder we're expecting to be forgiven. So that's if you're not making very much, that is still a way to fly under the radar. And then Dr. Rosché, you're saying that if you are working in, let's say, a nonprofit and your salary is low and you still are doing you got your side hustle where you're either doing Uber Eats or you're 1099 in some other business, if you are talking to your loan officer, or let's say it's Navient or Sally Mae or whomever it may be, you can let them know that that is not consistent income, but that your primary income is this amount. So they not only adjust it, your income-based repayment or your payment to that consistent income, not considering the other income. So that's really helpful to hear from both of you, and hopefully our viewership got that as well. So there was a question, is at the end of the 10 years on the public service loan forgiveness, do you have to pay the interest on the principal? I have one understanding, but I'm curious if...
I'm not 100% sure, so I would look, I'm going to pull up a reference for people to explore. But I think the question that I would think about more is, might you have to pay taxes on the amount that was forgiven? So yes. My loan repayments, like a couple years before, you had to pay taxes on it. So if you got $50,000, they'd give you $30,000 to pay the taxes on the $50,000, so that you only had to pay taxes on the 30. Mm-hmm. And then the law got changed and loan repayment became tax neutral. That was not taxed. I am not 100% sure about public service loan forgiveness. I'd be more concerned about, so if you are forgiven $180,000, is that considered, are you taxed on $180,000? That's the bigger question.
So I just actually learned about that, and the answer to your question, unfortunately, is yes. So if the amount is forgiven, then according to the IRS, that becomes income. And I'm still learning this, so I highly encourage people to talk to their tax accountants, if you work with a tax attorney, definitely make sure you are 100% clear on the year that you do the forgiveness or receive the forgiveness. Because currently the way it stands is the amount that is forgiven is considered income, because they're saying then you could have made this money, so we're going to tax you on it. So that changes things pretty significantly. So loan forgiveness is great, but if we don't see some changes in our tax reform, then you're still going to be paying on it. So that's not very good. In some instances, that can be very, very, very high. So I just want to recap on everything that we've learned. I mean, this has been such a great discussion. I feel like we've learned so much about how to start the process of tackling debt, how to really think about moving forward. I love that we talked about budgeting. I love that we talked about knowing what it means for your debt, how your money, like how your interest is capitalized, what your spending needs are. And to start early, I really, really appreciate, sorry, I saw a question. Just wanting to briefly backtrack and answer Samara Allen's question. You share information about your 1099 not being consistent before you file your taxes. Is that correct, Dr. Rosché?
Yes. So usually when you're doing your income-based repayment, they'll ask you, have you completed your taxes yet? And so you would be like, you'll say no. So make sure that it's at the time that's true. Otherwise, they'll ask you for your your taxes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for clarifying that. Like, there's so much information that's out there that I think it can be overwhelming to try and figure out what is accurate. So I really appreciate the resources that you guys have both provided in terms of where to go, how to look up the information, and even just the references of who you can talk to. I highly recommend, if you are in private practice, to talk to an accountant if you don't have an accountant. even talk to a tax attorney, because I should have listened to Dr. Rosché a long time ago, and I so didn't, in terms of understanding your business filing status and whether or not you're in the right status and how you could be taxed on your business. So really knowing like how to avoid paying extra when you don't have to. There's so much rich data here. So I really appreciate both of you coming out and talking about these issues with us tonight, because I can imagine that the nuggets that people are going to take away from tonight will carry forward into their future. And hopefully it's creating a financially stable and wealthy future for them for many years to come. So with that, are there any last ideas that you want to share?
Oh, I was gonna just invite people, if they are interested in working with me, they can go to mymindonmymoney.com. And even this Saturday, I will offer them an opportunity to come to Rethinking Money University's class. We're going to talk about taxes. Should you do your own taxes? Should you not? Understanding taxes. What are some write-offs that are often missed? So if you're interested in that, just go to mymindonmymoney.com and just respond back to an email, and I'll definitely shoot you the information to get on this Saturday.
Awesome. I'm typing that into the chat.
mymindonmymoney.com.
Okay. And Dr. Nabil, is there any last thoughts that you'd like to share?
One thought that I had that relates to this is I'm thinking about a colleague who went to professional school and took on a giant load of debt. And, and she does the side hustle strategy, which is she has a full-time job. She's a professor at a liberal arts college, so they don't make a ton of money. And she has a practice that is 1 day a week, and that's the loan payment. And she is pretty content with that. Like, that's her loan payment day. That money comes from, I think she's self-pay, and that's the money that she uses to pay down her debt. And that's a great strategy. And, everyone's hustling. I get it. Do the hustle that works for you, that doesn't burn you out.
Right.
Because we are in COVID. Take care of yourself. Pace yourself. We don't know when this is going to end. So, pace yourself. But, it's okay. A lot of people at the beginning of their career are hustling. Do the hustle to get your way to some stability.
Yeah. I hope that's one thing that changes in the future for our field, is that you don't have to do the hustle as hard. Maybe there's still some hustle, but like the wearing 85 hats, and it is very, very challenging. It's a lot of time, energy, and pressure. And I think it also sometimes actually makes it hard to figure out what your financial value is, because it's spread across so many different, areas. So I am hoping that come this administration or future administrations, come new graduate students advocating for more resources and supporting themselves, that we don't have to hustle so hard. It's because, burnout is real. So definitely taking care of yourselves. I 100% agree. So I want to thank you both so much for coming and joining us and having this awesome discussion. It was such a pleasure chatting with both of you. And I think that you guys have such a wealth of knowledge. I do hope that many of you take up the offer to chat with Dr. Rosché or to attend her classes. She is a wealth of knowledge and can definitely steer you in the right direction. Don't be like me, go the wrong direction. Make use of her as a resource. And Dr. Nabil, I would encourage you to follow Dr. Nabil at Dr. Nabil on Twitter. And I believe you have an Instagram as well. Definitely check out the content. He's provided a list of resources that you can access easily to find out more information about loan options. So I really, 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 really encourage you to look them up, follow them, and to take care of your financial health, which is holistically tied into your mental health. So thank you both so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right, I'm going to have you guys sign out, and I just want to say thank you so much to our viewership for hanging in there with us and talking about such an amazing topic that really, really impacts so many in our field. Just a reminder as we're wrapping up, Dr. Rosché, you can find out more about her Money University and her support at mymindonmymoney.com. You can also find Dr. Nabil on his Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Nabil if you want to learn more about what he's doing at camp, and just look for resources for payment service loan forgiveness. Additionally, if you're going to stick around, there will be the pad at the end where you can do some mindfulness and meditation to support yourself if you've been stressed, a little bit stressed from this topic. And then lastly, if you are not familiar with TogetherWell, if this was the first time that you have participated in a TogetherWell event, definitely browse the site togetherwell.com to learn more about the discussions that will be upcoming, and consider membership, which if you like to give your own talks or are interested in becoming a panelist on a specific topic, definitely create a profile, become a member, and put your skill set out there. We're always looking to have more folks join. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for joining, and until the next third Thursday, see you in April.